Denver, it's really, that's where everybody lives.
Starts at home and then follows to work. Okay. I believe everyone is mic'd up. Yes, sir.
Way up on the north end of town. And today, if you're familiar with that area,
Yes, I am.
it's right in the middle of,
Yeah, it's too bad.
yeah, Black Forest is actually where they're.
Okay, so my open is still going to be,
I think so. Maybe, maybe not.
you'll tell me. Hello and welcome to Iowa Talking Points. I'm Jeff Stein from News Talk 1540 KXEL. Thank you for joining us for another in this series of conversations concerning issues of interest to Americans generally and Iowans in particular. This program was produced in the afternoon of Friday, August 25th, 2023, in front of an audience within Studio 5 at Mudd Advertising in Cedar Falls. And we welcome to Iowa Talking Points Republican presidential candidate Steve Laffey. Mr. Laffey served as mayor of his hometown of Cranston, Rhode Island, where he saved the city from bankruptcy, and I trust we'll talk about that during the next hour. A former candidate for the U.S. Senate, Mr. Laffey wrote about that experience in a book, Primary Mistake. He later created Fixing America, the movie, with suggestions on how to address issues concerning the broken system of government. He and his family later moved to the state of Colorado, where he took up operating a farm and ranch and ran for Congress. He and his wife Kelly live in Fort Collins, Colorado. He is a graduate of the Harvard Business School. Mr. Laffey, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. It's a beautiful, beautiful city.
The format of our program is quite simple, a conversation about some of the topics of interest to you, the voters. And I will be joined in our questioning today by Gentry Collins, CEO of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce, and by Rob Mudd, Chief Futurist at Mudd Advertising. Welcome once again to all. We will be asking questions on a variety of topics. None of this is scripted, none of it is rehearsed, and hopefully all of it will be enlightening. So, first of all, Mr. Laffey, let's talk about your past experience in government and why you think that skill set is especially relevant to this point in American history.
It is. When I announced on February 1st as the first person to take on Donald Trump, I said the country is going to have a financial crisis now. Within a month, 3 major banks went under, and due to interest rate problems. And it's going to continue. But my background is unique and thorough in finance. Not only am I a graduate of Harvard Business School at the age of 24, but I spent 15 years in the financial field helping run the largest investment bank in the South. So I'm well versed in all of that. But after that, many people thought I'd start a hedge fund, and I was going to, but I had a call in to go to Cranston, where I'm from. Cranston, 83,000 people, not the largest city, not a hamlet. It went bankrupt. And I ran for mayor on a policy and a statement that, listen, I didn't come all the way back up to 20 years to live in Detroit. I will fix it. You won't like it. And I won. So that's the only time anybody's ever won an election, saying you're not going to like what I have to do. That's America today. By the way, while I was mayor, I taught the top finance course at the University of Rhode Island. So I think we need a financial expert and someone who understands how to put the right people in the right place at the right time. My people aren't in jail. My people who worked for me are running hedge funds. They're running research departments. My director of City of Cranston is running McKinney, Texas, one of the top 10 places to live in America today. So I trained them, I worked with them, and they're successful. We need people president who can put the right people in charge of these departments, who knows hundreds of people from business school, from business world, and to get this stuff done for American people. And I'm really running because I come from the lower middle class. The middle class in America has been destroyed for three major reasons: the public schools, China, and the Federal Reserve. I understand all three. I made a movie about two of them. And we have to bring back the middle class, restore it, so that people can have a life where they look at their children, have a job, someone goes to work, someone looks after Johnny or Susie, and they say, my son, my daughter can have a better life than me. 80% of people in America think we're in the wrong direction when unemployment's at 3.5%. That's never happened in American history before. They know what I'm saying is true. And yet, the election for president remains a celebrity contest controlled by the RNC, which I fought against in the past, wrote a book about it, and I'm just trying to break through so people hear this message, that we can actually do this, folks. We can restore it. But it's not easy, it's not simple, and it's going to take time. But America is behind such a rock and a hard place financially that no one should say this will be easy. No one should say we're not going to touch Social Security. No one should say the things that are being said. And I'm not. And it's harder to break through that way, but I think I can.
What are the steps that should be taken initially? And I asked you similar questions when we spoke on the radio, that if you put your left hand on the Bible, your right hand to take the oath, if this was that day, what's job one to get us where we need to be from an economic and fiscal standpoint?
Job one is to show the world that we can fix problems. And I think the number one line item in our budget, now if you're a CEO of a company, every day you might look at employee count, you might look at food costs, depending what you run. People should look at Social Security. It's $1 trillion now. It's $65 trillion, nearly double the national debt in arrears. In other words, what we say we're going to take in and what we're taxing, we're never going to do it. And if you're under 40 and you're listening to this, you're never getting it. Oh, you would get it if indeed they ran inflation the way they're doing today, when they say you're going to get a check for $2,000 from that letter they now send out again, but it's going to be $200 when you retire in real terms. So my plan, again, isn't my plan. My forte is not as an inventor. I went to find the person with the best plan, Larry Kotlikoff at Boston University, the world-renowned expert economist in Social Security. And so I took his plan. And so what it means is that we're going to let older people get what we said. Unfortunately, they will pass away. Younger people will be at the age of 20 in a brand new plan. Some people will be in both plans. But the new plan would be investing in a worldwide basket of stocks, bonds, real estate, and so forth, New Zealand, Timberland, et cetera, that you own, but you can't touch, unlike the IRAs that young people keep cashing out of. And then when you get to be 65, 62, whatever it may be, we'll stop buying annuities. Along the way, if you die, your heirs get the money. Along the way, if you get married, by the way, Social Security is the most sexist plan of all time. Do you realize, did everybody realize that you marry somebody, you have 4 kids in 4 years, you divorce your wife, she gets nothing? When you marry someone, you put in half, they put in half. If you're divorced, unfortunately, don't want anybody to get divorced, you keep half. So go to SteveLaffey.com.
No different, by the way, than a private pension plan, often with the qualified orders, the quadros.
Yes, exactly. My father had one that took care of my mother at Armbrust Chain. So it's a plan that, does it cost more? Yes, at the beginning. But would it show the world in America that the dollar could be stable? We do that first. I'm not one of the people you'll meet who go from topic to topic to topic. That's my first topic on my website. It's what I'll do first. Second, I'm going to go after the Federal Reserve.
All right, let's talk about the Federal Reserve, because as we are talking, they have been on a streak of 12 increases in the interest rate, all in an effort to stem inflation and yet the economy is still going along. And do they understand what they're doing? Is it the right prioritization? What should the role of the Fed be?
The role of the Fed should be simply one thing: keeping inflation at zero. Back in the 70s, they were giving a dual mandate, two mandates, which, again, if you took 8th grade math, you might remember that you can't really solve for two equations with three unknowns, to be a little simple about it. But you can't have a Federal Reserve that says inflation, we're going to try to keep it at 2, which makes no sense. And then we're going to be in charge of unemployment being very low. What we have is then the development of the Phillips curve. I won't get complicated with people, but they can't do both. What has happened because they have a dual mandate is that the U.S. senators, because we have the world's reserve currency, and the Congress don't do their jobs. They don't pass budgets. They just let the Fed do it. That's why you never see anybody calling for the resignation of the Fed. Even when, with a stated goal of 2% inflation, they ran it up to 9% because they let the money supply grow at 20%. Remember, the average person knows one thing. Inflation is a monetary problem. It's about money. It's not about Ukraine. See, if indeed you don't monetize the overspending, you have a recession. If indeed the price of butter goes up, you look for substitutes like margarine. If indeed oil doubled tomorrow because of whatever reason it would be, there would be a recession unless the politicians tried to monetize it using the Fed to print money. That's what's been happening. And that's why this problem is so large. The Federal Reserve, you know, they're losing $7 billion a month of our money now, by the way. No one talks about this. But I would then try to pass by legislation, again, no more of these executive orders. They just get, the next president comes in and they go away. Let's have a Federal Reserve that keeps inflation at zero. By the way, for people listening, does everybody know the fastest growth in American history was in the 1880s? You know what happened in the 1880s? Prices dropped. Who hates inflation? Really indebted rich people. Deflation. Who likes deflation? Normal middle class people. Like, somehow the Fed would convince you that you're going out to buy a car. I drive a Ford Expedition, let's say, and it's $67,000, and my wife says, honey, don't buy it this year. Next year it's going to be $66,500. Nobody says that. They're like, I need a car. So listen, we don't want prices to be dropping because, like in 1929 when they constricted the money supply, but we want inflation to be zero. That will keep the dollar stable. See, all these things are about, if the dollar's stable, I'll give you an example. Since January 2020, if you made $100,000, you now make $107,000 with real wages, on average. Some people make a lot more, some people lost their job. But you need $122,000 to make up for what the Fed did. You don't have the $15,000. That's why credit card debt, for the first time in many, many years, January, February, March, when it usually goes down after Christmas, people borrow on credit cards on Christmas. Some people still go to church. They do the Christmas thing, thank God. And that didn't happen this year. Credit card debt went up. So when I say this is about to happen, this is about to happen. And most of the problem has to do with the Federal Reserve and how they run things. They know this, by the way. The thought process that there was going to be transitory inflation when you increased the money supply by 20%. My tapes, listen, it's not just Mr. Summers, former president of Harvard, saying it. I said it. People who understand money said it. And it needs to stop because it's hurt too many middle-class people. This is why I'm running. I actually know this. We'll change it. You'll see a debate that no one will even talk about this in the Republican Party. It's not part of anybody else's plan. My plan is to enlarge the middle class by these type of plans, which take a long time to do.
Well, what you're talking about are things that are complicated, and people don't want to do math because it's hard. But what people do understand is the fact that credit card debt in this country is above, consumer credit card debt is above $1 trillion for the first time ever. Credit card interest rates are near record at more than 20%. That's right. And so for all the talk of a robust economy, all the folks who claim to know about it saying that, up and down the streets, and we're in Cedar Falls, and you've been going to shops during your time in town, I don't know that you're finding people who feel that things are terribly robust. The people understand, do they not? They just don't know how to fix it.
They do. That's exactly right. And I'm telling you, everybody, it's about to drop off a cliff in the next several months. Because one, President Biden tried the whole thing with student loan not repaying because he knows October 1st, on average, 34 million people stop paying on average $328 a month more. That never should have been stopped. You owe money, you pay it back. gets back to 2020, which we don't have to go into. But listen, people over age 62 have like they have $500 payments. There's a lot of people older who have student loan payments because of the Parent Plus loans, which should be done away with. But a lot of things are about to be stopping, like now, and that's why I'm running, because this is going to be a really, really bad time for America, because the debt of public borrowing, I said in 2011 when I made a movie, once it crosses 20 trillion, mathematically we can never go back to normal.
And now it is.
And now it's 25.
When you mention the student loan debt, and we talk about it as student loan debt, and when we phrase it that way, we think of certain individuals, 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds,
Right.
40-year-olds. But to your point, and I know a number of people where whether it's a Parent Plus loan or they just simply co-signed, well, you've got folks who are trying to plan for their retirement, worried about the obligation of a student loan because they thought their kid should get a good education, and that's coming back to be a difficult sell.
I have told, and I've produced solutions for the student loan debt, which is over 1.7 trillion. And some of them go like this, and again, people may not want to hear this, but I live in Fort Collins where we have Colorado State University. I have 6 kids. 2 have graduated and 3 are juniors at CSU. They live at home. It's $11,000 a year. I have friends in Fort Collins, love University of Iowa. They're like, I want to go to Nebraska. I love the Cornhuskers. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's 50 grand. Now, if you have a kid who's going to go study aerospace design at MIT, I get it. But CSU, Nebraska, University of Colorado, whatever. My kids get out with no debt. I know parents who have signed off on these type of loans. A kid got into NYU. They have $200,000 of debt. They make $75,000. The Parent Plus loans have taken parents from middle class. They're taking them into poverty. So there's lots of solutions that have to be done. I wouldn't have student loans for people crossing state lines for state universities. Now again, I'm in Iowa. I don't know if anybody wants to hear that. But Iowa has a good system. I'm sitting here next to a really good university that I met with people here who go there. Kids were working, and they're like, they really like it. So you have a good system. People should go here, live at home if they can, get through college. My new phrase, of course, to my kids is, college is a new high school. I hate to tell you all, but we go to grad school as Laffies. So, so that's where it is. But we can have a lot of solutions like that. But they're going to have another debate among Republicans, and no one's going to discuss this, Jeff. No one's going to discuss how they didn't discuss middle class. The word middle class is not in the last debate. It's destroyed for things like this, with amenities at schools and people tending to kids. They feel like they have to do this for their kids, but they don't know what they're getting into. By the way, with Parent Plus loan, just remember, no one says, can you afford to pay it back? They make sure you can breathe, right? That you haven't declared bankruptcy the last couple of years. They don't ask you your income. You want 200 grand? Send a kid off to whatever, University of Texas at Austin when you live in Nebraska? Go ahead. None of this should be happening.
I'll involve my colleagues in the questioning in a moment, but I want to ask about you as a small business owner. What kind of pressures do you feel based upon the last 4 years, the current administration, and this monetary policy that you've noted from the Fed?
Well, it's anything that you try to do is different from, I'll give you an example. In April of 2010, I moved to Fort Collins. Everything was cheap. So I bought everything. I bought a tractor, for example, a used John Deere tractor. I bought it for 22 grand. The guy went broke. Felt bad, but I bought it. It was a $42,000 John Deere 3750. Now, truthfully, I could barely drive it. I grew up next to a gas station. I kind of pretend, okay? But I have one, John Deere. John Deere right nearby. I saw
Yes,
the
sir.
Hall of Fame. So last October, I woke up and told my wife, everything's expensive. I sold everything. I sold that John Deere. I drove it for like 13 years. I sold it for $32,000. It's crazy. So, but for the person starting a farm, what are they doing? For the person trying to buy a home, mortgage rates hit over 7%. So this inflation has destroyed the ability for young people to look forward to the future. We as older people are the worst generation. We've taken too much. So any small business owner is looking at this situation, whether they own a little cattle operation, whether they own, whatever it might be, they're looking at it going, how do I really make ends meet? And it's very, very difficult. Minimum wage laws, what they have to pay, regulation at the local level, a lot of it's local level. But what's happened is people can't make ends meet, and now they've been playing the stock market, of course. And now this whole truth is about to come out where people really run out of the ability to spend. And what will the Fed do now? That's the real question. I believe they won't stick to their guns. They have to, the way Paul Volcker did in the late 70s and the 80s. 2 recessions happened because of it. This is 10 times worse than what happened in the 70s because of how much money the Fed has printed.
Questioning continues now from Gentry Collins of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce.
Mr. Laffey, let me start by saying thank you for raising issues that a lot of candidates are not talking about. I want to ask you, should you be elected president and focus on these issues that you've raised, Social Security, dealing with the Fed, and so forth, what is the average American's life look like in 4 years? So when it comes time to run for re-election,
Yeah.
on what basis should the American people judge your first 4 years as president?
I think it would be a lot like Cranston, where I ran for mayor when the city went bankrupt, and I said, you're not going to like anything I'm going to do. I will fix it, but I didn't come home to Cranston to live in Detroit. I don't mean to make fun of Detroit, but in 2002, that was a pretty rough place. It still is, I guess. And people understood that message, and they were scared. And so they voted for the guy who was a financial expert. I think the same basis, I won re-election with the widest margin in Cranston's history, and I'll tell you one little story about it. I'm running down the street, and my high school economics teacher, who gave me the book Free to Choose, is my campaign manager. He retires from teaching because he loves the city. This is what drives, towns in Iowa and drives Cranston. People still love this place. And he says, Mayor, this lady wants to speak to you. And I look down in the car. She's got the window down. She goes, I hate you. And I said, I've heard that before. She goes, I'm voting for you tomorrow. I just didn't like it. And I said, I told you wouldn't like it. She goes, you did. Yes. And as an evangelical Christian conservative in Rhode Island Republican, I won with 60-some-odd% of the vote, re-election. I think that if I were president, the truth is that we'd go through a very hard time for a year or two. Just the way it is. We're not going to straighten out Social Security, make it more expensive. But the people will realize in 4 years, even a 20-year-old will say, hey, wait a second. I put in this money the last 4 years. I can't take it out, but I own it. A meeting with a financial advisor says, listen, if it goes like this over 40 years, any 40-year period, you actually can afford to buy a home. You're going to have a real retirement plan, right? And inflation, by the way, I'm a populist conservative. I truly believe that 17 buddies of mine from high school, by the way, I have some pretty smart high school friends. Forget Harvard Business School or Bowdoin College. They could be on the Fed, and they would know how to keep inflation at 0. We do the Taylor rule, not to get complicated with people. We would look at money supply, which no one ever looks at anymore, and we would do it. But if that was their mandate, maybe it'd be 2%, maybe -1, and so forth. But I think what you would see then, imagine this. You're in Japan today, 4 years after I'm president. You have a 15% internal rate of return on a company. You say, wow, that guy Laffey. That dollar is appreciating 3% versus the yen every year, and it's still going to do that if they have those policies. I have an 18% internal rate of return. Let's build it in America. He's got that 999 plan from Herman Cain. We're going to take the money back without the same kind of tax rates. That's manufacturing. Remember, this is a very simple thing that we learn in economics. The GDP, the gross domestic product, is C, consumption, which everybody talks about all day long. C. But it's plus I, investment, right? Plus G, which is too big, government. And plus, but in our case, negative X minus M, because we import too much stuff. We never talk about these other two things, right? But the I is the long term. When we have a lot of I, investment, what do we have? More savings. When we have a manufacturing job in America generated, what do we have? We have 4 jobs. It's the biggest multiplier effect. When you open a Ford dealership or a manufacturing plant that comes to America, when we reshore these things, which I've been talking about since '05, people show up to sell coffee. Someone opens, like if it's a manufacturing plant, someone makes ball bearings next. They need batteries. Oh, we'll do batteries. We transport. We have guys driving UPS trucks to get places. So this is what's been missing. It's been hollowed out since 2000, since China joined the World Trade Organization. These are the types of things you would see by year 4. But I'll tell you one other thing. Even if I didn't get reelected because it took 5 years, I would still do it. I don't have something about me that says, although I like to kiss babies, I can't tell you that it's not going to be hard. I can't say it's going to take a week. I can't tell you that it's huge. I can just say, for our children's sake, everybody listening, please listen to me. I'm an expert in this. I know what I'm talking about. I'm only here for you. If someone else does it, I'll go back to Fort Collins and hang out on my little farm with my kids.
The American people, I think, know that they're looking for something. I'm not convinced that we know what we're looking
Yes.
for, but you can see it in our election results. In the last 9 federal elections, 8 of them have been partisan change elections. 4 for the Republicans, 4 for the Democrats, not in order. And it covers about the period of time that you're talking about. That goes back to the early 2000s.
Yes.
So the country is searching for something to make their lives better. Meanwhile, more than half of American households don't have $1,000 in cash savings. Their lives aren't getting better. I'm not so sure that you'll have trouble convincing the American people that sacrifices are required. How do you convince the Congress of the United States that sacrifices are required? Because what you're proposing here is going to require a Congress that will pass some legislation and get it to your desk as
That's
president.
right. And what's really missing once you change the Fed to make Congress have to do this, they can't print the money. It's not going to happen. No one's going to print any more money, so they have to make tough decisions. So think about it. President Roosevelt took a whistle-stop tour. This is a long time ago. People used to sell going by train. You can go to old flicks and see the other Roosevelt on a train. I would go around the country the way I did in Cranston. I actually did a whistle-stop tour in Cranston, but nationwide, go and explain to people that this is going to be tough. With the American people, I noticed when I made my movie and I traveled the country, they're ready to say, I'm in. They just need to know it's fair. They're ready to put extra money in. And 58% of the people have less than $1,000 in a working. But watch my movie, Fixing America. They're like, I'm in, but not if it's corrupt. I'm in, as long as everybody's in. And they're willing to put more in. But no one's bothered to explain this to them. People have been elected to fight with the other party. The major channels make money by fighting. Someone asked me in New Hampshire, how would you unify the country? I said, listen, I can't put a man on the moon like 69 and say everybody's laughing and joking, coming out of their homes. I hope it's not 9/11 which unified the country for for something, Pearl Harbor, these kind of things. I can only think of one thing that I know that everybody would unite about. Let's bring back the middle class. It came out after 1945 by policy, the GI Bill. You fought for our country, here's a home. You're gonna pay for it, it's not free. Here's an education, go to college. Have kids, lots of kids, because demographics extraordinarily important. I have 6, we need more people to have kids.
Gentry has 7.
Who?
Gentry has
All right, here we go.
We're doing our part.
As the vice president. So we need to do these kind of things and tell people and get on a train, a plane, an automobile, and go out and tell people this is going to be hard. They will listen. They will be in.
And their congressmen will follow.
And will force their listen, I convinced, and again, Cranston's just Cranston. I convinced everybody to vote for every one of my budgets who was a Democrat every year, and they hated my guts. They did it. I had meetings where people stood outside with the press, and I raised my voice. Look what's going to happen to you in Ward 2. Here's what's going to happen. This is what has to happen. They need to know that they're not going to get reelected. People have to go. People would go in Cranston, and people would go in America and say to their congressman, hey, Laffey says we got to do this. I like it. It's good for my children. Not good for me. Good for my children. You do it. You hear that? You go to a city council meeting in Cranston, Rhode Island, 1,200 people used to come to a city council meeting in a room that held 800. Imagine that, a debate. So because this is going to happen in America. They need to hear this message, and they will react. But a lot of people don't want to hear this message at the major news networks. They don't want this to get out, because then people won't fight.
Very good.
I want to give you a chance to interview your potential running mate a little further later, but for now, Rob Mudd of Mudd Advertising.
Larry, thank you for coming and being with us today. We've been blessed to have a lot of people through here, but as Gentry said earlier, we've never had one to talk the way that you're talking. My family's business, we work in the auto space, and so something that is a big concern for me and my people that work here is China and the electrification of the automobile. I kind of think I know how you stand on that, but if you would please educate us on what you would do with China, how you would deal with China, how the manipulation that China has on the currency. What would you do with China?
Yeah, I started this in 2005 when I made my first public speech running for the United States Senate, and you can read about it in my book, Primary Mistake. I was endorsed by the Club for Growth, very good people, and Pat Toomey, who became a U.S. Senator, was the head of it. I wrote on the document about free trade, because I love free trade, with Canada. with the UK, with countries that have similar GDP per capita, who are our allies, and they can keep a different steel mill in Canada that we might meet for national defense, because it's pretty much in America. I'm not making fun of Canada, but we can do these kind of things. Everybody has their own national defense purposes, and there's a milk problem in Quebec. But when it came to China, I told Pat Toomey, no trading with China. This is '05. This is after they entered the World Trade Organization, and I knew it was a joke. Again, I said to then head of the Club for Growth, there is no evidence that any country ever went from being communist to a democracy, a republic, all happy people, by trading with them. This, in the history of the world, they're going to become a more tyrannical, and they did. Now, I've been saying this, and I made a movie about it. So my bona fides on this are what to happen. You can go back to fixingamericamovie.com. I kept up what I wrote all the time, right or wrong. It says, here's why we don't want to trade at all with China. And I'm not saying this about other countries, by the way. And the reason is, I've been right. Now, what I would do is that I would start raising tariffs and not exempt Apple Computer. I would say, we got to get out of this country. We're going to reshore, We're going to bring a lot back to America. Some will be in Mexico. Listen, there's a whole thing where countries do better things than we do, whether it's high-tech manufacturing, low-tech manufacturing, whatever it might be, growing grapes, whatever. So that's going to happen. Think about it, folks, though. The State Department put out several weeks ago that no one should travel to communist China. But we run a $388 billion trade deficit with them? Is someone joking? The biggest non sequitur in every single Wall Street Journal or major article is China puts Uyghurs, like 1 million in concentration camps, America, but nothing. Did we do that in World War II? Did we do this in the past? Did we ignore human rights violations? Catholic priests disappear. They go to, by the way, they violated the treaty, the Sino Treaty that they had with Hong Kong. The people have been oppressed. So all this needs to end, and the only way to end it, and by the way, they make up all their numbers. They don't report the 20% unemployment now they have with their youth problems. They've always made up their numbers, but all the capitalists that made all the money and all the newspapers that wanted to sell newspapers just reported, they would say, like, at the end of the article, maybe these aren't true numbers, but they report them as true. America needs to be the dominant world superpower, and we need to make sure Chinese people rise up.
How do you take General Motors out of China?
We take General Motors out of China by saying, listen, if you want to stay there, one, we're not coming in to get your U.S. workers when they expropriate the property. Two, we're not taking any cars in from China. You could, I guess, stay in China one way or the other, but we need to not trade with China. We are the biggest trading partner for the world. We will have a stable dollar, and you will want to make this stuff here in America. Reagan, by the way, with Japan, which is a whole different situation called the Plaza Accords, because they met at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Reagan sort of had it. He went to Japan in the 80s and said, listen, no more of this trade deficit kind of thing. You want to build a Toyota, build the ones for Americans in America. Now, a lot of these Toyotas are built in America. I don't care if people buy them or not. My cars are made in America. I happen to drive Ford, but I did own a Nissan big van. It was made in Mississippi. When I go look at my tires, I buy Michelin tires. I buy the ones, I think it's B6 on the side, because they're made somewhere in Alabama, I think. So once in a while, I have to get them in Nova Scotia because they don't have the tire I want. If we had a cheerleader for someone saying this, like, by the way, everything I'm wearing except for my underwear, quite frankly, is made in America. I don't mean to joke. This is made in Vermont. This is Hickey Freeman. I mean, these are San Antonio shoes. I've been doing this for 20 years. Shouldn't the president do that? The way John F. Kennedy did physical fitness? No one seems to understand what I'm saying running for president. How about leading with America's best by buying in America? American people be like, wow, that guy Laffey, he buys, where do I buy the tie? And then, by the way, we all know one thing. If it's built in America and plants expand, costs go down. I buy my jeans at All American Clothing Company. I'm not trying to do an advertisement. They've lasted 5 times longer than stuff made in China. 5 times long. It's a better deal. It's like having, I think, a diesel truck better than a gas truck.
It's being hooked on cheap that keeps you coming back to buy
Yeah.
cheap, right? And so it needs to.
But I like long-term cheap. Long-term cheap is buy stuff made in America. It's made better.
So why do you believe that the others that are running for president aren't speaking the way you're speaking? Because what you are saying is true, I take it. I don't think you're sitting here not telling the truth. And the truth that you're sharing is scary. So is it that they don't want to talk about it, they don't understand it, or it's not a popular thing to talk about to get elected?
I think it's because the money in politics comes a large part from corporations. And in many ways, Walmart became a Chinese company. It wasn't okay for China to lobby the United States of America. Hey, we want stuff made in China. It was okay for Walmart and other major corporations to lobby on behalf of actual China, without saying it, to let this relationship become so out of whack. But remember, folks, the Chinese military is built on the back of the trade deficit they have with America, the trade surplus they have with America. If it's let's say it's $400 billion, and they have a 20% profit margin, that's 2/3 of their military budget they got from America. This is insane. They steal all their products, the new jet, the J, whatever looks like our. They have new laws now in China where they want the technology that we have there. We can't do this. We can't do this and have a country that's strong, prosperous, and not at war.
So our president loves China. He loves China more than he loves the state of Iowa. He loves their solar panels. He loves their money. How do you deal with that? How do we deal with the chasers, I would say, the cheap chasers, and then the liars?
Tell the people the truth. The transition away from China will cost money, may cause a recession, but your children won't fight in a war probably at a much higher level of safety for our children. I'm really here for my children and your children. I'm not really here for the corporation. I mean, listen, I helped run a corporation, a publicly traded one. I love free enterprise. I'm really here because America's at the end. I don't want to be dire. We can fix it, and we will, I think. At the last moment, we'll rise up like we always do. We'll be a union. We'll be united. But unless we do some of these things I'm talking about, that no one will talk about, it's going to be so much worse. It's going to be, but if we had done this 10 years ago, by the way, if we had just 10 years ago, pick a year, said we're going to get out of China. We're not going to allow this to happen. And looked at, Apple Computer would have some of its stuff in America, some in Mexico, some in Canada. I'm sure they'd have some in Singapore. I make up a country, right? Everybody has a comparative advantage, but it wouldn't be in China. And they wouldn't be threatening Taiwan, and they wouldn't have taken over Hong Kong, and they wouldn't have put more people in it. And maybe they'd be free because their people would rise up. Remember, if the people in a country see hope, they'll rise up. If they think they're not going to get any hope, what the mistakes we've made in Iran, we could go on all about foreign policy. But if they see hope, they'll rise up. And they'll overthrow these people. We're not against the Chinese people.
Correct.
We're against the one person now who took over the country. And by the way, that's really a benefit to us. Now there's not even a Politburo. There's one guy. He's going to be there forever. He's making huge mistakes, to quote another politician, and it's benefiting America. He'll continue to do that. He probably didn't know the balloon flew over America. No one will tell him anything. If you work for a really good company, like I worked at Morgan Keegan, you'll go into the CEO and say, this is wrong. He'll say, thanks. If you work for a guy like Z, you're going to go in there, you're going to disappear. That's good for America, but we need to push it along faster.
We are midway through this Iowa Talking Points conversation with Republican presidential candidate Steve Laffey. Short break now, and we'll be back in 2 minutes on Iowa Talking Points. Welcome back to Iowa Talking Points. I'm Jeff Stein from News Talk 1540 KXEL. In today's edition of the program, which was produced on Friday, August 25th, 2023, we are in conversation with Republican presidential candidate and former mayor of Cranston, Rhode Island, Steve Laffey. I want to begin this portion of our questioning by sort of picking up where you left off. We were starting to talk about some foreign affairs issues, and we've talked a bit about China. Talk, if you will, about the threat from Russia and how U.S. involvement in Ukraine would either continue, change, etc., under President Laffey.
It would change, it'd be more aggressive. The backdrop, so people know, if you know Russian history, there's a phrase, Russia without Ukraine is a country, Russia with Ukraine is an empire. From Ivan the Terrible in 1537 to the treaty with the Cossacks in 1654, through the Potemkin villages, which are in Ukraine under Catherine the Great, through World War I and World War II, Russia feels as though, because where Moscow is on the map, it has to keep pushing toward Europe. It's always done that. There's been pushback. There's been a number of wars, because that's a flat piece of land that's easy to take, and they feel easy to come back. There's been 8 incursions back into Europe. In fact, one of them was Putin sitting next to President Bush at the Olympics when they went into Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the state, so people know where it is. But he was always going to do this, looking for weakness. That's what Russian czars, Russian leaders do. So the pushback has been enormous, and the surprise from the Ukrainian people has been enormous. I would tell people, listen, I am not an isolationist. America must be the world leader in freedom, and it must help people when it can. It has the right, not the duty, to step in when things are wrong and people are going to suffer. In the case of Hong Kong, we really couldn't do it. Too far, too small, too far away, and Russia and Chinese has too much. But in Ukraine, we could, and we did. And I also tell people that there's a lot of propaganda that I see going on. It's not right to say this. It's not right to say that there was a vote somehow in the one side of Ukraine where everybody voted to stay with Russia. That was the little green men. This is wrong. It's wrong to say that no one knows where the money goes. Congressmen get a report every day in our country. And it's wrong to say we spent this much money, really, except for the Patriot missiles and ammunition, which is a problem we're not prepared for. A lot of the stuff is used, and they're using it effectively. I say far better to have Russia lose, which they would lose if I was president. The borders go back to the original borders, so that Russia is not doing this again, that Putin leaves the stage the way Khrushchev did. Takes a couple of years sometimes after the Cuban Missile Crisis. He left. People forget there was a coup when they were starting to have some freedom, and then the leader left 3-4 months later, right? Gorbachev. So these things happen, and it's going to happen to Putin. So we have to make sure it happens. And the other thing that I'm seeing, which is really good, to credit President Trump, he did talk about NATO not putting up enough money when he started being president. But what's happened is NATO is now alive. Who would have thought Finland would join NATO? Sweden? Nobody would have thought this. I wouldn't have thought this. But they are, and military spending is going up. It has to go up. So we have to win in Ukraine, because if we don't win in Ukraine, they will take Poland. By the way, maybe 20 years from now, you could be a short-term thinker and say, I'm going to end this in a week, we're going to do this, or when I think about especially one other candidate, I don't think he thinks that they're humans. They're humans in Ukraine. They're equal under God to me as I am. They're rich, they're poor, they are what they are. And if we can win this war, wow. If we could stop Russia from doing this and someone took over, maybe worse, maybe better. We don't know who takes over in Russia. We're not trying to take away Russia as a country. But if they know they can't mess, then other countries like China knows that they can't go into Taiwan. These are the long things that Reagan taught us. We win, they lose. And even when, by the way, Reagan's thing was the air traffic controllers. And you look through the documents in Russia, and they said, this is a guy that we have to deal with. And he won. And we need to win in Ukraine.
What concerns do you have about the alliances that are being formed between Russia and China? Because again, there is the fear that either America is not prepared now because we have overcommitted to Ukraine beyond the used equipment, et cetera, ammunition in particular. But if it gets a little sticky for Putin, he's got the alliance with Xi, and what does that do then for the global dynamic?
Well, the global dynamics, people have to understand, we shouldn't talk about communist China alone and we shouldn't talk about Russia alone. We should say Russia in cahoots with Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, China, Communist China are in this together. So when a missile goes up in North Korea, there are Iranians, people from the military standing there, right? So I think that Z realizes that Putin's a bad partner. It's a relatively poor country. By the way, Russians and Chinese people throughout history, in the 60s, they almost had a major war together. They hate each other. Yeah. So they'll hate each other again. They can pretend to like each other against America because they really want to bring down America. They can't do it. We're too strong. And the way that we actually stay strong is to be what we were a long time ago. We're the voice of freedom. We broadcast it. We tell people this is what we do in our country. We have a rule of law, and we have a rule of law, And we treat the president the same like Nixon, and we treat the president the same as anybody else. And people gravitate to that. I think the shift that we really have, if I was president, is to South and Central America. We have to bring back the Monroe Doctrine that went away. I don't know who said it first, John Kerry, whatever, back in the day. It has to come back. People don't screw around in our hemisphere. And by the way, this is power politics. I'm not making it up. We're the strongest country. You don't do this in Cuba. When Secretary of State Pompeo said to Maduro, leave today, and he didn't leave because a Russian advisor in Venezuela, really, said stay, and he went to the tarmac, and he stayed. That was a great loss for America. If I say leave that day, you better leave that day. Now, when it comes to foreign policy, I see a lot of people saying specific things. I don't think running for president, you should say things that are that specific. We should still maintain this strategic ambiguity. By the way, I think Biden does a pretty good job. He says he's going to do something and someone backs down from it. That's strategic. Just so you know, it's strategic ambiguity. I don't think they mean it that way. I think he just says these things and they have to but we shouldn't have anything but that, so people don't know exactly what I would do as president. But given what I've said so far, you can imagine I think we need maybe not a 700-ship Navy. We need to build at least 3 nuclear carriers a year, not 1.3.
Before I involve my colleagues again. So with regard to the hemisphere, we've seen documented a crisis at the southern border. Yeah. The northern border is pretty porous as well, not getting as much attention. So talk about what President Laffey would do with regard to border security, north and south.
Yes, well, north is easier, and we're blessed by geography with 2 oceans and friends to our north. But south has to be something, and I don't want to say, again, some people have said, we're going to bring the military, we're going to bring them right into Mexico. We've got to be careful about saying this kind of stuff, because remember, if someone becomes president, like President Kennedy, he wasn't expecting the Bay of Pigs. Things happen that are not even what we're talking about if someone becomes president. So I think there's a two-pronged lesson for what happens in Central and South America. I've been to Guatemala, and by the way, if you look me up, I'm the only person running for president who's been across the border in Tal, Mexico, in a relatively dangerous situation. I was with Dr. Robin Hoover, a Christian pastor. It's in Nation magazine back in the day. I'd been to Guatemala. I think he had a genius idea. The border should be secured, but we need people to come here to work. So you come to the border, you're going to go pick strawberries in California. So here you are, Jose, great. You've got 25 guys. You're going to go there securely. 25% of what you make is coming back to this border in a bank. When you come back in 6 months or 8 months, $8,000's here for you. They're going to come back. It used to be people went back and forth. A lot of people don't want to go back now because they can't come back, right? So we're going to have people do some work in our country that we can't do. I get it. But Republicans used to be about cheap labor, and they let people come in. And by the way, Democrats made the mistake that, Hispanic people, they're going to be Democrats. I don't know. They go to church. They love Jesus. Seems like they're Republicans, right? So that's what's happening, I think. Mm-hmm. So I always thought this, by the way, because I had a very close relationship with people in Rhode Island and in the minority community of Hispanics. So I think the other thing, by the way, is we always read about in the papers about the Gaza Strip. I'm not saying the people that play to the Gaza Strip who hate Jewish people isn't somewhat important. I would focus on countries to our south to see if we can make them real republics. Not by electing the wrong person, not by what we did in Guatemala in the 50s. I mean, focus. You're our friends. You're hardworking people. Let's develop trade with you, right? So we don't do that at all. It's never. When was the last time you read an article about Guatemala? Does anybody know where it is on the map? It's pretty close to Mexico. In fact, it touches it. So we've got to do these kind of things, and no one seems to want to. But it's strategically important, again, not for tomorrow's soundbite, for 20 years from now for the safety of our children. But the border has to be secured. And by the way, if you came here illegally, you have to go back. I hate this. I hate to be so tough. If you break the law, you have to be punished. I mean, it's the same for everybody. And that's how I feel very strongly. Not that we, by the way, wouldn't change the visas. If you got a college education, you work in the STEM research, you weren't born in China like the 2 sailors they just arrested for espionage, born in China. Really? Who did that? So you can come here easier and quicker. We need highly skilled workers, but we also need people to do some work. And I think that would secure the border better, and I think we'd have better relationship. Think about it. If Guatemala is a real country 25 years from now, did anybody really come to America? People in Guatemala love Guatemala the way I love America. They should be able to stay.
5 minutes of questioning led by Rob Mudd of Mudd Advertising.
You've shared a lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of things we haven't heard before. We've had past participants talk about getting rid of all the agencies in D.C. What do you think of that? Is that foolhardiness, or would you buy into something like that?
Well, certainly we don't need the Department of Energy. We could handle the military apparatus transporting nuclear stuff around. We could put that back to the defense. I imagine if we went to the Department of Energy, we would see very few people working. Remember, if you think about the Department of Energy all these years, wouldn't the price of oil remain stable? Doesn't it go up and down? What's the point? So that's an agency that we don't need. We don't need a Department of Education. And I have a whole, we can talk about education later. But when I hear people say we're going to end the FBI, end the CIA, listen, there's things called zero-based budgeting where we're going to go in and say, what do we really need, right? And certainly the FBI has a real problem. I would have to get, again, I'm the only candidate, I think, who has literally 100 people I could start naming today that I went to school with, went in business with, who are retired, who could run the Department of Interior, who wouldn't be like there for themselves, right? They would be like, okay, I'll do this for you, laughing. and I know these people. And so we would put people in charge with really big accounting backgrounds that I know, most of them, and they would go into the FBI and say, this is how it has to be changed. Now, there is something that Donald Trump didn't learn at all, is that when you take over a division, and I was at Morgan Keegan, and John Stokes, the vice chairman, told me every division, Laffey, remember, 30 days from now, it's your problem. If there's people there that don't fundamentally disagree with you, we got to get rid of them. Now, we don't throw them out on the street. We have great severance. You need your people. If I became president, there would be a lot of people gone. I don't know why President Trump was a developer. He doesn't hire a lot of people. But that doesn't mean we get rid of the agencies, but reworking them to make them effective, having real plans, using things like zero-based budgeting, we can save an awful lot of money. And I would go back to the American people and say, here's what I did in the FBI. First of all, I brought in my people. Sorry, there was a spoiled system. The people that we could get rid of, we did. The other people who are working their butt off, we want to find out what's going on. By the way, when I took over every division of every company, I interviewed every single person. Now, I wouldn't be able to do that. It's too big. But I'd like to be with the people at the lower levels who are working their way up and say, listen, doesn't leave the room. What's going on? That's how you find out a lot of information. When I ran research, I had Sleuth of the Month for Associate Analyst. The winner every month got bacon, like 10 pounds of bacon. But I found out what was really going on. That's why my stock picking ability went up. We were the best stock pickers in the United States of America over a 5-year period, written up in the Wall Street Journal. Not because we had the best stock pickers, we had great ones. I was able to figure out what was really going on that analysts didn't want to say. I do the same thing as president in a much bigger way. So I wouldn't commit again to, we're not going to get rid of every agency. The government has to run. But we should have more of a spoils system where a lot of people do leave, and we got to revamp some of these things over and over again.
You sound like a very common sense guy that has done a lot of things, a lot of experience. Why is that missing from the people that are on stage today?
The party was taken over by different people, and people like me refused to run. I can't tell you how many people say, Laffey, I went to school with, I live vicariously through you. I have no idea what the quirk is. John Huntsman's brother runs a big chemical company. He was in the Wall Street Journal back. He said, I'd never do this. He seemed, by the way, everything in the article I agreed with. Here's what he does for a company. Here's what he believes. I thought, like, wow, I met my half-brother. He works in Texas. He's not running for office. There's something definitely wrong with me that I think that God called me to try to help this country before it was too late. And I started, by the way, not starting a hedge fund when I could have raised a lot of money with my background, and going to move to Cranston, Rhode Island at the age of 39 and making $80,000 a year, which was the lowest paid job, and again, it was totally fine. God doesn't care what I make, to help the people that I grew up with, and found that, wow, I really could help them. And I miss it greatly. I love being the mayor, the personal relationships. It wasn't about the finance stuff. I like to do the same thing for America. I like to get the chance to do so. I don't know why more people don't do what I do. I do know why it's easy to grab corporate money, because when you grab corporate money or a really rich person backs you, generally in a super PAC, they want power, they want influence. They're not really interested in doing the things that we're talking about.
Final 5 minutes of
It's
questioning to be led by Gentry Collins of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce.
Mr. Laffey, you've talked about growing a robust middle class. And I would propose to you that the greatest way to human flourishing, including expanding a middle class, has been American free enterprise. That we, after thousands of years of recorded history, where global human life expectancy was stuck at the same number for literally thousands of years, in one American century, we more than doubled global human life expectancy. We did a little better here in the United States, but even globally, we more than doubled human life expectancy during the American century. And during that expanded life expectancy, we will now lose more of our poor to diseases of excess rather than diseases of deprivation, right? Real achievement when it comes to human flourishing on a broad scale after one American century. My concern, and what I'd like to know how you might handle as president, is that we're losing our own next generation. That when you look at surveys about young people in this country, and even young adults, people who are aging into the electorate, who are driving the next generation economically and will become American leaders in time, nearly half of them no longer believe that American free enterprise and American capitalism are the way of the future. They're looking for something else. We've talked about how we deal with that around the globe. How do you deal with it here at home?
A number of ways. I do want to point out one thing. My real economic hero is Milton Friedman. I think the invisible hand of Adam Smith works. And I think that it's lifted so many millions out of poverty. I keep in my office a letter from Milton Friedman from 1983. I tried to get him to come to Bowdoin College. So that's where I come from, and I believe I'm a monetarist. So that's just wham. I think that we have a real problem with the younger generation, which is why at stevelaffey.com you can see that I want to get every single kid we can out of the public schools. They cannot be fixed. Now, we're sitting in a beautiful place. I'm sure people think they have a good public schools, and if they want to keep it, great. But I think as president, and I know I'm not responsible for it, we can lower property taxes, right? We can get kids a check to parents across the country, and we have to just say to people, I say this all the time, do you know how the federal government actually hates your kids? And they go, no, what do you mean? There's something called the internet. Why is the best Algebra 1 teacher in the world not teaching 5 million kids this week? Your little kid Johnny, your little kid Sam, my kid misses class. Why can't he go to a lesson for free? They will never do it. I would do it, by the way. I've taught Algebra 1 to my own kids. You're looking at the only homeschooling dad who's running for president, maybe since the 1800s, I don't know. So that's a whole nother subject. But kids, young people are getting out. 13% of 8th graders are proficient in civics. That means, by the way, in New Canaan, Connecticut, or here, it might be 70%, but in Detroit, it's 0. To get to an average of 13, someone has to be 0. So think about what's happening. Kids staring at phones, lack of work ethic. No one's promoting this. By the way, can I just say one thing no one will talk about? Obesity. 40% of our cancers are obesity. 40% of our healthcare costs is obesity. I hear people saying, we spend 18% of GDP on healthcare and Switzerland spends 12. Ever been to Switzerland? Ever seen a really large guy? I haven't yet. I've been there a number of times. So a president should promote this and say, listen, it's not okay. We can do what JFK did. We can do a lot of things, but if people don't say obesity is bad, and I'm not trying to make fun of people. I'm just saying that we know it's bad. We know it's unhealthy. We know it's lowering life expectancies. And we know we can turn this around with the right leader who promotes these things. Listen, I have 6 kids. My kids are good kids. I think if you saw them in the White House and you saw that my daughter's the shooting sport representative for the United States of America in 4-H, they all shoot trap and they go to the state, they shoot muzzleloader, but they win state contests in making their own clothes. Why couldn't we have a president whose kids are like, again, they're not perfect, I'm not perfect. Why couldn't we have a president that has something like that? That people would say, oh, I guess I'd like my kids to be like Laffey's kids. I'm not trying to be less than humble. But young people have to learn back their work ethic. You know, if I learned anything from my father, who was poor, who grew up really poor, his father died, his father was gassed, was an alcoholic, gassed in World War I, was found stumbling, you know, around in eighth grade, and brothers took him in at a Catholic school. If I learned anything, it was work ethic from my father. 3 jobs to put food on the table. He still worked, always worked. A tool maker, sold real estate, Japanese imports, had to sell. I mean, we've lost this. We can get it back. It's just going to take it. By the way, it won't take next year. It'll take a generation. If you have a leader like me, I think, with people around me who are doing the right thing, not getting arrested, the bare minimum, we can do it. But we just need people to wake up and say, yeah, in my humble opinion, that guy Laffey has what it takes. Let's go with him. Let's do what Herman Cain did in 2011. Let's back this guy and make the networks talk about it. And then you'll see other people talk about it. And if I don't win and other people talk about it and do it, I'm okay.
Very good.
We are close to the end of our time, so we'll give you the last 2 minutes
Thank you.
to make your case directly to Iowa voters.
People of Iowa. That's okay. People of Iowa, I just want you to hear this one message. I come from the lower middle class. I know what the School of Hard Knocks is all about. I had a pretty troubled family. I worked. I got ahead. I have 6 children. I'm only here for one reason. I've been haunted by the movie I made in 2011 where I traveled the country and met with people on sides of roads called Fixing America. The subtitle is You're Not Alone. These people stare at me when I go to bed. They want to fix the country like you do. I'm here because the country doesn't have much time. I think the country should be led by a financial expert who has a business background like myself, who knows how to put the right people in the right place at the right time, and can deliver to you a very hard message that the transition away from the nonsense in the past, that you all know is nonsense. That's why 80% of you think the nation's in the wrong direction when unemployment at 3.5%. That the hard choices have to be made. I will make them. You won't like some of them. 4 years into it, you'll be like, okay, it worked. Let's do it. Let's keep going. We'll have a strong dollar, 0 inflation. We'll have Social Security for young people that's 5 times what you're going to get as old people. And we're going to do it for them. It's going to cost more money at the beginning, but in the end, we'll have a lot more investment in America. I'm Steve Laffey, SteveLaffey.com. I'd like your vote.
Thank you, Mayor Laffey. And that brings to a close this edition of Iowa Talking Points, featuring a conversation with Republican presidential candidate Steve Laffey. And as noted, learn more at the campaign website, SteveLaffey.com. Today's program was produced on Friday, August 25, within Studio 5 at Mudd Advertising in Cedar Falls. Thanks to our panelists, Gentry Collins, CEO of the American Free Enterprise Chamber of Commerce, and Rob Mudd, Chief Futurist at Mudd Advertising. Go to IowaTalkingPoints.com for more information on future events, which will be live streamed and available via video on demand at IowaTalkingPoints.tv. And they will also be aired on News Talk 1540 KXEL. I'm Jeff Stein. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Iowa Talking Points.